welcome back to the channel. To most fans of zombie fiction, or video games as a whole, the Left 4 Dead series is one that requires no introduction. Not only a series from acclaimed developers Valve, but coming at a perfect time to be a part of and a huge innovator both in the zombie game craze and the advent of mainstream online cooperative gaming in the mid to late 2000s and early 2010s. These games also hold a very special place in my heart, being some of the first mature rated games I ever played and a cooperative experience I shared with friends and family alike. Left 4 Dead 2 was also one of the first games I was really excited for. While not explicit horror games in the slightest, the atmosphere and mood of a zombie story allows them to dabble in those themes quite a bit. The first game really did scare me as a kid, but playing it quite often and getting better at it, especially with friends, really made it a lot more approachable, and it helped me get over my fear of that and a lot of games I used to be scared of. To players of a proper, mature age range, there really isn't too much to be scared of in these games, but that doesn't stop them from having their own share of strange things, interesting facts, and a couple mysteries. Of course, not all of these are going to be scary either. But even over 15 years since the original game released, and a strong, stable community following that still remains fairly strong to this day, there still remain mysteries that baffle players, and just a couple oddities and interesting things that not everyone might know. And even if they do, they're still interesting. In this video, I'm going to be going over some of those. These will range from facts that a casual player might not know, but anybody experienced with the game will be aware of, and some things I think even longtime players might not know anything about. Hopefully some of you longtime players can learn a thing or two, and if not, I can at least be a little entertaining or provide a new perspective. I'll try and make these as broadly understandable as possible, but I do expect you to have at least a little bit of knowledge of the game. And I don't have a rigid structure for this, but I want to save some of the more interesting and less talked about topics till the end. Stick around till then if you want to see something that I feel goes completely under-discussed in the community, despite how interesting it is. But let's start with an easy one. Both games in the series star a cast of 4 characters, once ordinary people thrust into a zombie apocalypse, forced to work together to survive. At a glance, each of the characters fall into pretty simple archetypes and fulfill different roles in their group. They have some depth to their backstory, but not too much, and with the exception of Nick, who is implied to have a storied criminal past, we know just about everything you need to know about the main cast. Except for one thing. What's Coach's actual name? Probably the most iconic of the sequel's new cast, Coach never actually gives the other survivors his real name. He's only ever introduced and always goes by Coach. Rochelle even has a humorous line that calls this into question.
Do you think Coach was his first or last name?
Coach's choice to go only by the title does suit his dynamic in the group fairly well. He positions himself as an elder and a leader to the group, striving for them to do their best, pushing them a bit, but also keeping them together and keeping their heads up. It isn't too hard to imagine him in the same way during his actual coaching days, which might be why he only lets the other survivors call him by his title. But that still does leave the question of what his actual name is. His name goes unconfirmed, with nothing in-game pointing to any real names, and no one from Valve speaking on the matter. But we do have thoughts from one person who knows the character quite well. Voice actor for Coach, Chad Coleman, when asked in an interview, stated that he believes the character's full name is Wendell Jones.
Or what would you name him, Coach? What do you think Coach's name is?
Oh, Coach's real name. When I look at him, I think he would say, "How you doing? I'm Wendell Jones."
Some in the community have agreed with this interpretation as part of their own personal headcanons. And this would also make Coach the only other survivor with a confirmed full name, alongside Bill, whose full name is William Overbeck, fitting for both characters seen as the leaders of their respective groups. An obscure footnote in the release history of the series, the Game of the Year edition for Left 4 Dead 1 came just a few months following the initial release of the game. As the name of it suggests, it comes after the game received many nominations and a couple actual awards for Game of the Year from various publications. Though ultimately, the re-release didn't actually add anything new to the game. The disc did contain all the updates that happened up to that point, which included the Survival Pack and DLC, but all of those were free. To my knowledge, all console versions updated to the Game of the Year branding after the release, regardless of which version it actually was, though the changes only altered the main menu and the loading screens. 2 later DLC packs were released, Crash Course and The Sacrifice, both of which were paid, at least on console, due to stipulations from Microsoft at the time. Regardless of which version you had, you still had to go out of your way to buy them, so there wasn't much to note about this re-release. And with many players being on PC or moving on to the sequel sometime after, this version ended up being a massive footnote to most people. I do have memories of it, mostly for the loading screen, because I remember somehow someone joking that Bill's eyes looked like cigarettes. I can't say it for the life of me now as an adult, but as a kid it really amused me. It wouldn't be the first oddity in the game's official artwork though, including, famously, many of the game's loading posters are just slightly off in certain ways. Not necessarily always mistakes, but sometimes the survivors just don't exactly look right. One of the most well-known and one of the only real mistakes is also on a poster that arguably every player has seen. On the loading screen for No Mercy, Zoe can be seen holding a pistol, but she seems to have 3 hands. The pose is nearly one-to-one with one of her character select icons, which makes it all the stranger because it's correct in that icon. It appears like they wanted to move her left hand down a bit, and in the process just gave her another set of fingers. Staying on the No Mercy poster, it actually shows another fairly common trope amongst these sort of poster oddities, which is the characters holding weapons that don't exist in the game. The remaining 3 survivors all seem to be holding a scoped assault rifle that doesn't actually resemble any that's appeared in any of the games. While a handful of other posters do feature game-accurate weaponry, these inconsistent scoped rifles and other strange weapons can be found on other posters, such as the Passing, Dark Carnival, and Swamp Fever. This is just speculation, but I believe all the posters in the game are created from photos of the game actors posed in their outfits, with artists either directly drawing over them or applying filters to create the paintbrush effect that we see. I would presume then that the style of gun we see in these posters is just the prop that Valve had on hand. The posters being photos would also explain things like Zoe's hair being down in a couple of them, or the survivors' height differences. This one's a suggestion from a friend. It's a completely intentional part of the game, but kinda interesting all the same. If you go out of bounds on certain maps, the game is known to detect this and spawn spitter acid under you, apparently without making a noise. It's a little difficult to find reports of this now, especially because many popular out-of-bounds spots were patched with the Last Stand update, but I feel confident in bringing it up because I've seen other people discuss this online, and I have my own vague recollections of this being a mechanic. My friend's spot was just outside the first map's safe room on Dark Carnival. It's over these buses, where he said that he used the shopping cart to get over. Can't tell if I was just doing it wrong or if it's been patched out of the game, but there's numerous spots like this. He said he remembered the acid being completely silent too, which definitely adds to the creep factor of the game. If somewhere you're not supposed to be in, the game is deploying defenses to get you out of there, and it's not even giving you the tells that it normally does. As far as I know, this is a solution for exploits in survival mode to get the god spots that you just can't die in. How much it really worked is up to anybody's guess, but it's certainly an interesting idea. Going out of bounds can get you some interesting results, like unused sections of Dark Carnival's Tunnel of Love, but the real finds come with using the console. In the second game, there's a map that, of all things, is a curling stadium. No one's really quite sure why it's in the game's code, and it appears like it might reuse some assets from Dark Carnival's finale, but there's no good reason for it to be here. The other 2 unused levels we have are, notably, an early version of the parish and a tutorial for modding tools. Both of those have very clear-cut purposes, but we don't really know what's up with the curling stadium. The way it's named doesn't imply it's from any campaign that we know of. There's really no clues as to what it's doing here. Maybe it was some kind of like mini-game the developers had, maybe it was part of some kind of testing, or maybe it's just here, made for fun or no reason at all. It's an innocuous but really strange addition we might just never get an answer for. One campaign that never even saw the light of day was set to be a DLC pack that not only would be a rare crossover for the series, but the only one with a movie so far. Cabin in the Woods was a sci-fi horror comedy film that would eventually see release in 2011, but it began its filming in 2009. Plans were made between Valve and the studio MGM to create downloadable content for Left 4 Dead 2 that would presumably add the cabin as a whole campaign, but not much is known about this. What's known for sure is that the film's delays and financial struggles led to the DLC being canned. Some special infected still appear towards the end of the film as part of a cameo, so there's still some traces of this collaboration. How far along this DLC got, and if any will be shared publicly, still both are uncertain. You might think it impossible for us to see an unfinished or unused campaign, but stranger things have happened. As another YouTuber is prone to say,
more on that later.
Before we get into the real strange stuff, let's do a little rapid fire round of some Survivor-related topics. Rochelle wears the Depeche Mode t-shirt. For those who don't know, they're a quite popular 1980s new wave band known for more darker synth-pop sounds. I'm also quite a fan of them, at least some of their more popular work, though surprisingly, I didn't get into them through Left 4 Dead. It's interesting when Left 4 Dead already has its own spoof on rock groups like Kiss with the Midnight Riders, and it has work from Jonathan Coulton, who has his own career as a folk singer, but a lot of fans probably know him through his contributions to the Portal games. As for Depeche Mode, writer Chet Falisak told Kotaku that Valve was apparently soliciting many different bands and labels at the time. Depeche Mode was one of the few to respond to Valve, saying that they could use their likeness and audio recordings, which obviously led to the t-shirt. Now, the eagerness probably had something to do with Depeche Mode's 12th studio album, Sounds of the Universe, coming out the same year, but regardless, it made for a neat little cameo. It's also not too unlikely that the achievement, Violence and Silence, might be in reference to the band's song, Enjoy the Silence, though it's unconfirmed and could just be clever wordplay regardless. But a later achievement in the same campaign is also a musical reference, so who knows? Sticking with Rochelle for an even shorter one of her voice lines has her mention a character named Jacob.
Girl, you should have stayed with Jacob.
This is the only mention of the character in the entire game, so there's really boundless room to speculate. Could have been a friend, a lover, or perhaps a co-worker. And perhaps this Jacob could have had some means of travel or connections that would have spared Rochelle from this whole mess. Especially if he was a co-worker at Rochelle's news station, there's a good chance he might have had some connections to Sita. But if that's the case, given what we see in game, Rochelle probably dodged a bullet then. Purple Francis is an iconic part of Left 4 Dead 1's cast. Oh, I'm kidding. Purple Francis was a legendary shitpost born from a case of wiki vandalism. The two users, now credited as Lucy and Unknown Trope, vandalized the wiki on February 12th of 2021. It allegedly wasn't even just a page or two, but whole sections of the wiki being changed with all sorts of cross-referencing. All done in an effort to make sure that people knew the truth of Purple Francis. Fortunately or unfortunately, the changes only lasted a couple days before they were reverted. I believe you might be able to look back at some of these older changes on the wiki pages themselves, but I am unsure, especially considering that I think the changes happened on the original fandom wiki, and many users have since migrated to a newer wiki because fandom kinda stinks. With the reputation the meme has now, it could be a little hard to find proper evidence and anecdotes from the time. And yes, it's unprofessional, but I don't really think I have the patience to dig through the old fandom wiki, especially due to its aforementioned rancid fucking stench. Most links I've found crediting the original creators also seem to be dead now, so it's a double lost media special. Skimming through his lore, Purple Francis is a businessman who owns a root beer company. He was born in a candle factory, and he turned purple because of an iron-rich diet, and this makes him quote-unquote incredibly attractive to women. He has a daughter who had an affair with Ronald Reagan, has 2 other kids and a wife, and appears to be a bit of a family man, and also was removed from the game at some point because of real-life events. He was apparently heavily implied to be dead by the events of the passing, and was confirmed in the Sacrifice comic where, I just have to read this excerpt. In the Sacrifice comic, Purple Francis is seen getting lassoed by a smoker, then getting charged by a charger, then punched by a tank, and then dragged in front of the moving train by a jockey, killing him. His death was seen as a national tragedy, and it was known to be Valve's worst move. The writers for the comic were soon fired and exiled to a remote island in Guam. But then we also have reports that it was unsure if he survived the sacrifice, and when Gabe Newell was asked, he quote-unquote grew immensely angry and ordered the person who asked the question to leave immediately. I could probably be here all day giggling like an idiot at these really stupid jokes, but I'll end off by mentioning that there's plenty of mods out there to put him back in, including one by a Last Stand update developer, so I guess it is canon after all. Speaking of community works and canonicity, all of the survivors have community voice lines which technically go unused. These were recorded during sessions for the passing voiceover. After having some extra time being done with the main lines, Chet Falisak reached out to members of the modding community asking if they had any specific requests for voice lines to be used in their campaigns. Both groups got some, but the Left 4 Dead 1 cast has a much smaller assortment and they seem to be more generic. Left 4 Dead 2's cast, meanwhile, has much larger assortment of voice lines to work with. They include some generic topics, such as the cold, trains, and even ghosts, but we also have a couple that seem to be more directly inspired by certain maps. According to the wiki, the 3 identified maps are Die Scraper Redux, which has a handful of fairly generic lines, but also has one specifically mentioning the wind, and a military base. You then have Haunted Forest by Dr. Boo, which is where the ghost-related lines come from. Lastly, and somewhat surprisingly, is a port of Team Fortress 2's Badwater Basin. Ellis has a famous line that acknowledges the reference.
Dude, this is just like Team Fortress 2!
And Nick and him both have lines questioning the fact that it's a bomb they're pushing, but otherwise the survivors all have voice lines in line with Team Fortress 2 where they're constantly shouting out pushing the bomb. It's almost kind of funny hearing a different cast of Valve characters repeat these lines that are probably burned into every TF2 fan's brain. I believe all of the voice lines are made by request for certain maps because there's ones mentioning things as specific as boulder traps, but These are all the wiki has mentioned, and it would be a little hard to track because all the voice lines are simply labeled as community. If you know or at least have a hunch as to what the original maps may be, please leave a comment. For a last one before we get into some more darker and intriguing stuff, and staying on the topic of other games, we looked at 2006 with Capcom's release of Dead Rising. The achievement Zombie Genocider is awarded to players who manage to kill 52,594 zombies, that being the exact population of the game's fictional setting of Willamette, Colorado, and it expectedly makes for a very difficult achievement. Valve, in a move of one-upsmanship towards Capcom, as well as some malice towards anyone trying to 100% the game, added an achievement to Left 4 Dead called Zombie Genocide Est. This achievement tasks you to kill 53,595 infected. Exactly one more than Dead Rising's achievement. This kicked off an inside joke that would spread across to not only other zombie games, but even just games from around that time. Achievements referencing the genocide name and the number could be found in all sorts of games, like Prototype, Dead Island, even Rock Band had a spoof on it, and the much more relatively recent Madness Project Nexus has an achievement based on it. Of course, Capcom themselves wouldn't take this sitting down either. There's some flavor of Genocider achievement in every subsequent Dead Rising game. 2 featuring the achievements Z Genocider 2, Genocide Harder, and Zombie Genocide Master, 3 featuring Master of Massacre, the only one not to use genocide in its name, and Dead Rising 4 having Z Genocider 4, The Return. It's also worth a mention that Dead Rising 2 brought the number up to 53,596, one-upping specifically Left 4 Dead. While it started something across the whole industry, the franchise gives special attention to Left 4 Dead for kicking it off. Left 4 Dead 1 also featured another little spoof on it with The Littlest Genocide, added with the Crash Course update that only required you to kill 5,359 in that campaign. Left 4 Dead also had the Last Laugh Come the Last Stand update. Included with as many new achievements was Z Genocidus 2, Episode 2. A name very likely poking some fun at Valve's own Half-Life and its episodic structure. The achievement asks you to kill 53,599 infected. With the extra flavor text, you made sure the dead won't rise anymore. A pun I really don't think I need to explain to you. While it was kind of a meme amongst game developers in general, the relationship specifically between Dead Rising and Left 4 Dead was kind of this cute little teasing and showing respect to 2 really great zombie franchises of the era. And it wouldn't even be the last time that Left 4 Dead was acknowledged by a zombie game made by Capcom. For its Steam release, Resident Evil 6 saw a crossover with Left 4 Dead 2. Resident Evil 6 itself received The Mercenaries No Mercy, which, you know anything about Resident Evil 6? Adding to the Mercenaries is probably the best move you could have made. This mode both served as a slightly harder take on the mode, using the uncapped capabilities of the PC to spawn some more enemies, as well as the crossover with Left 4 Dead, where players could choose one of the 4 survivors from Left 4 Dead 2, and even enable a special infected pack where you can fight the tank and the witch. Though they're all reskins, and I don't think the infected are particularly interesting to fight, seeing the Left 4 Dead 2 cast do all the crazy moves you can in that game is really fun. And the music is changed to Midnight Ride, which is a bit of a shame because the Mercenaries theme is so good. And if you have that special infected pack, you'll end up getting interrupted a lot by the tank and the witch themes. As for Left 4 Dead, it didn't really receive any content of its own, but Valve did encourage modders to mod in Resident Evil characters, so if you ever wondered why there's a lot of Resident Evil 6 in the workshop, that's why. In the original Half-Life, there are 4 sound files simply labeled The Horror. I believe they reappear across the expansions and in Ravenholm, but in the original game, they appear in the 8th chapter, On a Rail, and the endgame chapters in the alien world Zen. The sounds range from sounding like people screaming out of fear or desperation or some kind of otherworldly monster. They're all quite intriguing sounds on their own, but I want to highlight one that plays in the map C2A2B2. which itself is completely optional and not required to be entered by the player. This sound and the rest of the horror sounds go completely unidentified. There's nothing in the original games that makes these sounds, nor real clues as to what it's meant to be portraying. It's most likely just there for the ambience and to represent some kind of alien creature, but it's quite unsettling all the same, especially being set in an optional room that ends in a dead end. But what does this have to do with Left 4 Dead? Well, did that sound familiar? Because it should. If you didn't pick up on it, that is the same sound that plays when a horde is triggered in the first Left 4 Dead game. It's not the only reuse of the sound effect, but it's probably the most iconic given it's an important audio cue throughout the entire game. In its day, it was used in a lot of zombie mods for Counter-Strike and the original Half-Life, and similar sounds were even used for the Fast Zombie in Half-Life 2. It also, in my personal opinion, just makes for a scarier sound. Left 4 Dead 2's Horde Scream is pretty unique in that it actually makes an effort to have a lot of voices to sound like a horde, but something about one loud, unified scream is more effective in my eyes, and it harkens back to Left 4 Dead 1's moodier and darker atmosphere that, in a lot of ways, I kind of prefer. But this sound also serves as a relic of the interesting development period of Left 4 Dead 1. Left 4 Dead actually gets its origins as a mod for Counter-Strike Condition Zero. This near proof-of-concept stage saw some players armed with weapons taking the role of humans. They have the bomb, which in Counter-Strike fashion they have to plant, fighting against a horde of players with knives that represent the zombies. This mod was helmed by Totorock Studios, who had already worked on Counter-Strike Condition Zero alongside Valve. With the popularity of this mod, they eventually received Valve's approval in mid-2005 and worked alongside them to create what would become Left 4 Dead. There's some misconceptions and misinformation out there that Terror-Strike was an unknown part of the development until recently. That isn't true. We've known for some time now that Left 4 Dead got its origins as a Counter-Strike mod. In interviews and such, developers have mentioned how the Horde came from the idea of fighting against players with only knives. As a matter of fact, I'm not entirely certain when the name Terror-Strike was dropped and changed to Left 4 Dead. I believe I've heard people say it was even called as such in certain magazines, and as late as to when we had the Survivor concepts finalized, but used the much earlier beta designs that many players are familiar with now. I'm not 100% certain on that, so don't quote me on it, but we do know and have known for some time that Left 4 Dead got its origins as a Counter-Strike mod that had the name Terror-Strike. The misconceptions originate from around 2023 when, during Half-Life 1's 25th anniversary update, updates were pushed to other Gold Source games, including Counter-Strike. And in it, Valve accidentally left an early build of Terror-Strike. Some places accidentally reported that this meant that we had discovered this for the first time, when that isn't true, but it was the first time we had our hands on the prototype. And it made for a really intriguing piece of Left 4 Dead history that now lies in the hands of players should they want to check it out. It is, and probably forever will be, the earliest piece of Left 4 Dead's history we'll ever have our hands on. But it isn't the first or only piece of early Left 4 Dead that we have our hands on through leaks. Back in 2016, an up-to-then unknown part of Left 4 Dead development was released to the public. Damn It, also sometimes known as Damn It, Buried by the Flood, is an unfinished campaign from the era of Totorock being the main developers of Left 4 Dead. To my knowledge, this was the first time the community was ever made aware of the campaign, and details about when the campaign's concept was originated and eventually dropped are hard to come by. The campaign, as it released in the initial leak, was very unfinished, missing all sorts of assets and using a lot of grey boxing. Even just to look at the poster, the survivor designs and general art style all seem very different. None of the survivors in the poster seem to be the recognizable ones from the finished game, though, upon closer inspection, you could probably make out who became who. The man at the top center very likely became Bill, since he's wearing a military vest and seems to be smoking. On the right is also a man in a suit who, while he looks very different from Lewis, it could pretty safely be assumed that he ended up becoming him as well. While the female character's face looks very different, the outfit is nearly one-to-one with Zoe's beta designs. And lastly, the character on the bottom seems to be wildly different from anyone we got in the final game, but given the bruiser personality he seems to have and the beard, I think it's a pretty safe bet this became Francis. He also appears to be holding a melee weapon, which, while it very much could be a stylistic choice, it also could be a sign they were considered for the game. I also just want to make mention of the fact that the poster seems like it's set more in a city, and not really like it's in a dam, but I'm not here to talk just about the poster. We have a whole campaign. There's multiple workshop uploads of the campaign, with some having more changes than others. One is even a full-blown community-made remaster, which is quite impressive, but I saw a straight upload of the map with the Left 4 Dead 1 survivors in particular. I feel neither qualified to do a complete campaign overview, nor do I really have the time or patience to do that right now, but I'll go over some highlights because there's a lot of very intriguing design decisions in Damn It. The campaign is set over the course of 3 levels, an orchard, a campground, and the titular dam. The dam itself is almost certainly meant to be the Kinzua Dam on the Allegheny River in Warren County, Pennsylvania. This is in the Allegheny National Forest, which some very attentive players may know is the location of Blood Harvest. The campaign even begins in the wreckage of the plane that rescued the survivors at the end of Dead Air, meaning Damn It was making a direct attempt to bridge these two campaigns together. As some players may know, while Left 4 Dead 2's campaigns have very direct connections and continuity, the Left 4 Dead 1 campaigns were way more implied. Crash Course did show us what happened in No Mercy's chopper pilot, but every subsequent campaign, players are simply left to assume what happened with the rescue vehicle. But we'll come back to this later. Dammit starts the players off in an airfield that's full with explosive barrels, so watch your shot if you don't want to get set on fire. The level takes the survivors through the orchard and following some train tracks before ending in an abandoned house. The campground showcases some military checkpoints and signs of disarray, as is common with military things in the Left 4 Dead universe. There's actually a unique crescendo event here too that encourages survivors to split up into two groups. One group is encouraged to go to the generator to power a mechanism where the other survivors can wait with a good vantage point to cover them as they return. The finale is definitely the most unique part, being the first running finale before even the parish. The survivors need to activate explosives to clear the path and later use elevators and open floodgates to get across the dam. There is, scientifically speaking, a shitload of tanks that spawn, lots of zombies, and points where survivors can get insta-killed very quickly. Particularly at the start with rushing waters and doors that close on them, and at one point when the survivors walk on the edge of the dam. That was a lot of detail, but the point I really want to stress is that it's a very complicated campaign and very ambitious for an in-development one we never got to see. There's a lot of other little things too, like the fact that tier 2 weapons spawn very often and very early, or the fact that there's even strings that refer to heavy rifles and heavy shotguns in the code for Dammit. But the two things that interest me the most are the attempt at a running finale long before Left 4 Dead 2 tried the concept, implying it was probably on the table since the first game, and the fact that this is a direct bridging of two campaigns, which is not something Left 4 Dead 1 really did ever. Again, it implies to me that it was an idea that the developers were always aware of, hence the greater focus in Left 4 Dead 2, but this is a topic we'll come back to later, along with some other content that was leaked alongside Dammit. The special infected are arguably one of the key mechanics in Left 4 Dead that keep the game engaging and challenging, as well as the crux of the entire versus mode. While the original 5 and the additional 3 included in Left 4 Dead 2 create a very delicate balance, there are plenty of concepts for special infected and even regular zombies that never made it into the final game. The aforementioned Dammit has codes referencing a playable infected named Queen, but no information exists out there. The wiki speculates that this could have been an early name for the witch, in the same way that the tank is referred to as the Hulk in certain string tables and unused voice lines. This is unconfirmed, however, as the main source for the witch being playable is the now closed Turtle Rock forums. Probably the most known of the cut infected was the Screamer, planned for the original game. It would call hordes similar to the Boomer, but in a more passive way, as it would run from the survivors instead of attacking them head-on. This is usually agreed to be why the Screamer never made it far into development, as getting punished the whole horde spawn for simply not chasing down an infected wasn't very fun. Though the concept of a fleeing infected would be retouched with the Fallen Survivor in the Passing DLC. The Screamer was said to be scrapped around 2005 to 2006, sometime before the QuakeCon 2007 demo. The Screamer does live on in certain ways. The idea of an infected that attracts hordes was obviously turned into the Boomer, and it appears his screams got used for the Hunter in the final game. The Hunter is also related to a long-standing rumor of zombie dogs. As far as I understand, there is no strong evidence that such a thing was ever considered. While I couldn't find them myself, there are allegedly sounds labeled as zombie dog, but early footage shows them being used in the Hunter, and there's otherwise no evidence of the dogs. The only other real tangential piece of evidence is the sound of dogs barking at the start of the Left 4 Dead 2 intro. Zombie dogs are kind of a trend in other games, so it makes sense this became a rumor, but as far as I'm aware, it's completely unfounded. The other well-known cut infected is the Left 4 Dead 2's Leaker. It was similar to both the Boomer and the Spitter, but instead functioned more like a bomb where it planned itself. This idea didn't work so great, as the loud alert and general predictable nature of it meant that survivors could simply run away. There is enough code left in the game that you could get a semi-functional version of the Leaker via console commands. They take the form of a seemingly invincible Boomer. Their special attack causes them to stand still for a moment before exploding and igniting a small fire, as well as dealing lots of damage to people around them. There's also a couple infected we only know through concept art. Peter Koenig, an artist at Valve, showed a lot of his concepts for Left 4 Dead 2. Not only do we get to see some art of the survivors and earlier concepts of the special infected, but we also see a handful of special infected that never made it to the final game. In Koenig's own words, infected animals were at one point a possibility, as can be seen with the Hell Piggy and Hell Hog concepts. There's also Verminades or Verman, who's an infected with a colony of rats inside of him. The caption says he would erupt at the rats that try to get you, so it's hard to say if the rats could either be their own NPCs you'd have to fight, or if it was simply just an attack if you got too close. But it was stated that this was a bit too supernatural for the game's style. Next up is the Meatwall, which is often compared to the tank and the Boomer, and is this giant lumbering beast of a zombie. It's apparently insanely huge going off the corpses in its hands. Our last one is one that at first doesn't seem to go identify it and has these long sharp claws and a lumpy, strange looking head. Apparently this is an early Charger concept. While I do like the design on its own, it really doesn't feel like it fits into Left 4 Dead, as do some of the other designs here. But at the same time, that's what makes them unique, and that's partially the point of concept art. There were lastly some textures and other assets for Common Infected that took some time to be properly used. The wiki states there were further skins made for the first game that were cut to save on memory, and later brought back on the Last Stand update. The Fallen Survivor can also be seen for a short moment in Left 4 Dead 2's intro, implying that it was meant to be part of the base game. In-game, the gun store owner Whitaker uses a very similar model to the Fallen Survivor, despite his canon appearance being wildly different, further suggesting that the Fallen Survivor was not only planned from the start, but had some assets ready at the game's launch. Lastly, there was an unused gore effect for Common Infected, being a slash down the spine meant for the axe's unused overhead downward slash. It is allegedly now visible thanks to the pitchfork, which was added in the Last Stand update. The gore in Left 4 Dead 2 was a massive selling point and improvement from the first game. And when it comes to zombie media in general, an important part of nailing the aesthetic is making the zombies truly feel like walking, shambling corpses. This can obviously create a problem of trying to make sure that it's not something too disturbing or graphic that it ends up making people uncomfortable in a way that entertainment probably shouldn't. Not to mention what developers have to be put through when they consult real reference material. Left 4 Dead 2 was almost one of the games to use real-life imagery of graphic content to make their zombies feel all the more scary. And ultimately, while it was said some photo reference was used, the developers avoided using real serious imagery. The full quote from technical artist Bronwyn Grimes can be found on the parish's commentary node mode. In short, she mentions a team member having a nightmare folder full of people with diseases and injuries. They were hard enough to look at that they avoided using any of these in the actual finished product, and instead, they utilize housing insulation and potato skins of all things. It avoids any undue stress or overly graphic material, and in my opinion, still looks pretty well, though you can almost see it in some Infected when you have that knowledge. This does become a bit more disturbing, however, when, in 2022, fans of Half-Life 2 discovered the Corpse 01 model got its face texture from a real burnt body. I won't show the original photo, but look away or skip ahead if you don't want to see the texture in-game. Well, I'd say it's not the most disturbing, since outside of the teeth, it mostly is just a skull. It's still a quite unsettling discovery, and it makes you consider how, even only after a few years, Valve strayed away from using more realistic textures like this. You have to question how it even got in the first place. People allegedly tracked down the photo to a medical textbook, but that's a whole other rabbit hole. This just goes to show the kinds of bullets we dodged when Left 4 Dead opted to not use that nightmare folder in the first place. Though this and other extreme examples are unfortunate signs that the use of real gore for reference is still going quite strong in the industry. While the leak of Dammit already gave us a lot to chew on with the whole campaign released, there's something that I find way more interesting and way less spoken about that came with the leak. 2 survival maps also came with this release. Both of these locations don't even feature in the Dammit campaign, and they raise a lot of questions about the development of other campaigns and of Left 4 Dead as a whole. Our first map, and the one I would say is a little less interesting, is Coal Freighter. Upon a pretty quick inspection, you could see it's similar to the boat that would later appear in The Sacrifice. That's already quite interesting when you remember that these are assets from early pre-releases of the game, and The Sacrifice was a post-launch DLC. We don't exactly know when plans to The Sacrifice were made, but this at the very least tells us that it reused assets from very early development that never made it into the final game. Further inspection also shows locations that not only tie it to what would become The Sacrifice, but also to dead air. While mostly surrounded by water, if you no-clip off in a certain direction, you can see a shadowed, untextured cityscape. Some of the structures in this town resemble those seen in the first 2 chapters of Dead Air. And in Dead Air itself, if you turn around at the start of the campaign, you'll notice you are by the water. The first chapter even ends with you entering the Harborview Hotel as the safe room. Fairly interesting, considering this comes with Dammit, a campaign that is set to take place after Dead Air. But perhaps it was just some kind of bonus map, or a part of earlier development in Dead Air when the first chapters were actually set more towards the middle. Maybe, maybe not. But we could obviously tell the idea of the set piece stuck around since it was reused for the docks in The Sacrifice. Keep The Sacrifice in mind though, because the second map, the High Rise, seems completely unrelated to anything we've seen in the game. Despite being 6 stories tall, which is generally 1 story short of actually being a high-rise, it's a stunning set piece, probably my favorite I've seen in the entire game. The most interesting visual is probably the helicopter that got down to the roof and is just dangling through some wires. It ominously looms over the rest of the tower as papers and other debris fall, making almost a sort of rain-like effect. But despite its current state of ruin, this tower once seemed fairly lively. It's possibly the only place in the entire game we see a lot of survivor activity outside of all the graffiti and safe houses. Signs asking for help and for trade seem to imply this was once a bustling survivor community, but there's plenty of corpses now. Hard to say if those were once the inhabitants of this tower, or simply the results of the people living here putting up a good fight for at least some time. The event that calls the Horde appears to be the elevator, which is seemingly out of service thanks to the helicopter crash. But once more, the question is raised. Where is this set? Once again, this map has nothing to do with the set piece or anything that happens in Damn It. A short investigation reveals the building is named the Union Tech Tower, most notably seen emblazoned atop that elevator that you call to start the Horde. While it's no surprise if none of you do recognize it, this is technically mentioned in the game. In Chapter 2 of The Sacrifice, the same one that reuses the boat set piece like we saw in the Coal Freighter, there's a map that has a mention of the Union Tech Tower. There's also unused graffiti that says, "Overrun, new military evac point on the roof of Union Street Tech Tower." So, it's by The Sacrifice's location, is it? No, this goes deeper. Taking a step outside of the tower with no clip reveals a street that might not exactly look familiar from this angle, but you've probably seen it before. There's some shops in the hotel that are identical to what's seen at the end of Dead Air's first chapter. This isn't a coincidence. There's a whole out-of-bounds area that it's identical between the two of them, at least in terms of the basic geometry. But it's enough to tell us that the Union Tech Tower is right here in Dead Air. There is even a building, roughly 8 stories tall, that's right where it should be in the survival map. Obviously, it's hard to say if this is what the design would be should it have been in the final game, but it all lines up too well. Modders have even suggested they found camera pans in the code that, while they're buggy with a regular Union Tech Tower, if you place it in roughly this location, it pans over to the greenhouse, which is where Dead Air starts. This all points to the Union Tech being a part of a campaign that happens just before Dead Air, but how do we get here exactly? The Coal Freighter gives us some more hints, but if you want some real answers, we surprisingly have to look forward and look to the Sacrifice. If you didn't notice, that map I showed you with Union Tech on it also makes a mention of the Coal Freighter, and it quite honestly looks like a layout for an entire campaign. At the end in red we have Union Tech, which is right next to the label for a greenhouse rooftop, which in my eyes completely confirms its connection to Dead Air. But we also have earlier the mention of the freighter, and plenty more locations earlier on the map, all of which seem to be near the dock. But why in the Sacrifice? Especially when, even though it seemed to take the freighter concept, it didn't do anything with Union Tech. When you consider the freighter and the high-rise both seem to take place before Dead Air, near the water and the outskirts of the city, you might realize that the Sacrifice takes a lot more than just the freighter concept. The whole first chapter is set on the docks. But if that and all the allusions to the unused content being reused here wasn't enough, how about the road in the second chapter? While not a direct match, details like the texture really line up with the ones we saw in Dead Air and the high-rise. While it's not easy to say exactly how much of it was straight up reused, it's generally agreed upon now that some of the plans and the assets that make up the Sacrifice were actually taken from the same place that the high-rise and the barge come from, an unused campaign. One we never saw, meant to bridge Death Toll and Dead Air together. This last lost campaign is dubbed The River by fans, thanks to the map names for the Sacrifice levels in the code. Fan mockups not only showcase what the end of High-Rise would look like should it connect to Dead Air, but also how easily the first chapter of the Sacrifice could have seen the survivors being dropped off from the same boat that rescued them at the end of Death Toll. There's all sorts of other smaller pieces of anecdotal evidence about the river, but the most we know with any level of confidence comes from these survival maps, as well as the bit of evidence we have from the Sacrifice. It was a campaign meant to bridge Death Toll and Dead Air, and if finished alongside Crash Course and Damn It, would fill in the holes between all the campaigns in Left 4 Dead 1. It likely saw the survivors being dropped off on the docks by the St. Lydia, fighting their way across the coast and into the city, where they eventually make it to the Tech Tower with plans to reach the greenhouse. It obviously never made it to fruition, but unlike Damn It, it never got leaked, though lots and pieces of it seem to be reused in the future, much more than Damn It. While one could theorize little to no playable content of the river existed outside of these survival maps, a common hypothesis by fans actually has to do with ownership rights. It's speculated that Damn It and a large majority of the assets made specifically for it were owned exclusively by Turtle Rock, which explains why in any of Valve's work, they never put it in the finished game, the DLC, or anything in future. Meanwhile, for one reason or another, Valve had access to the assets of the river come the time of the sacrifice. With the theory being the first two maps being straight ports from the river, with the finale simply reusing a map already made for the Passings finale. How true these ownership rights theories are really uncertain. There's a whole history between Valve and Turtle Rock that I don't even want to touch because it's a very complicated issue both of legality and morality and just personal views that I'm not even qualified to speak about if I wanted to get into that right now. As for speculation, these survival maps are the same fate for us as they are for the survivors. Dead ends. Much as we can glean from them and try and search for more, at the end of the day, they're never going to give us this unfinished campaign. We could fight desperately against impossible odds in the hope of a rescue that will never come. But isn't fighting hopeless odds just human nature after all? And besides, look at what this community's already done. I mean, all this information comes from the community piecing things together on their own. This topic might be fairly underreported and it might feel a bit dead in the water right now, but the community's come together and turned one survival map into a whole campaign. Who's to say members of the community can't come together and work some magic again? Or at the very least, come to a better understanding of what was going on with everything. It certainly makes for an interesting topic, no? And well, I hope this all made for an interesting video. To all of you who've stuck to this point and watched the whole thing, I really appreciate it. This was already a very ambitious idea, definitely the biggest I ever made, but I didn't expect it to end up going this long. The Left 4 Dead games are really near and dear to my heart, as I said in the intro, and they're ones I'm quite knowledgeable about, and I felt like the whole format here is something kinda interesting that I haven't completely seen done before. While I'm not going to exclusively cover Left 4 Dead going forward, I do think I have a good amount of topics left that I could probably make another video on this. And of course, I'm very much open to any suggestions you may have. I know there's probably topics I missed, got something wrong about, or just don't have all the details on. So please, if you have any kind of suggestions or just want to see more of this, please do comment and let me know. I think I'm going to adapt this format to some other games too, but I want to make sure they're games I'm either really knowledgeable about, or I feel like there's really enough worth talking about in them. But after this, I'm definitely taking a bit of a break and making a shorter video next. I want to do smaller form content on a couple specific oddities, some weird games and facts in general, and maybe even some mysteries and creepypastas and things like that. Just a whole smorgasbord of weird things that probably will interest you if you like this video. If that does sound up your alley, I would really appreciate a subscription. I'm almost just shy of about 1,000 subs right now, and that's still crazy numbers to me. All your guys' support has truly been amazing. Every comment puts a smile on my face, and just seeing a video do good really brightens my days. I hope this video was worth the wait and a real step up in quality in terms of what I've been making. I try to link as many sources as I can, including videos, so if you want to watch a little more about some of the things I mentioned, they should hopefully satisfy that. I also have to thank all my channel members. All one right now. Hello, Crow.
Hi.
Memberships are very much appreciated because they help me pay the bills, but not at all mandatory. Just watching and supporting my little passion projects is all I really need from you guys, and I appreciate that deeply. I hope you all enjoyed watching and have a great day before and after this video, and if not, don't make fun of me in the comments because Purple Francis isn't funny or something. But it's time for me to wrap this all up. I hope to see you guys next time with whatever mysteries we delve into next.